Hello and welcome. I am Cyril Stober. Between the 6th and the 18th of November 2022, global attention was on the challenges of climate change. Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt hosted the UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, in which Nigeria was an active participant. Now, key initiatives produced at COP27 aim at shaping the process of planning and designing economic policies in a manner that factors in the impact of climate change, decarbonizing the urban mobility landscape, and dealing with global waste by 2050, among others. Nigeria's Minister of Environment, Mohammed Hassan Abdullahi, was at COP27. He joins me now to review the country's participation in the conference and decisions reached in the global effort to save the planet from what some say is an impending catastrophe. Minister, thanks for joining us on One-on-One.
Thank you. It's quite a pleasure to be here with you.
Right. It's amazing, isn't it, that some people are still in denial when it comes to a matter of climate change. And some say, well, we're not going to live long enough on the earth to witness any devastation and to the magnitude that people are imagining. But climate change is real, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. From the perspective of science, it has shown that recent global events in terms of that affect nature, that affect climate, that affect even biodiversity conservation are purely man-made. In other words, the actions of man is beginning to impact negatively on the climate. Now, a simple example is Lake Chad. In the last 10-15 years, Lake Chad is beginning to dry up, affecting livelihood of the communities around the Lake Chad region, and of course spurring insecurity. And again, if you look at what we call the northern frontline states, there is apparent desertification, it's creeping in. And if you go down south by the coastlines, you could see that there's so much, apart from the activities of polluters, there are natural events that are hampering, the region in terms of erosion, in terms of, general devastation,
Okay.
of our coastal zones. So, yes, there are people who are in complete denial, but science have shown that climate change is really real, and the earlier we give it priority, the better.
Okay. Well, COP27 held, and Nigeria was part of that conference. So let's look at Nigeria's participation. What was the country's priority at COP27? And let's review our participation in that conference.
Okay. Usually, before we go to COP, the practice is to call what we call the stakeholders in the environment and climate space to brainstorm and agree on what are the priorities, of the country in terms of the major issues to be discussed. Now, before then, there are a lot of build-ups through certain blocks that we belong. For instance, there's what we call the African Ministerial Conference of Environment Ministers. It's called AMSEM. We had a meeting in Dakar. Then before then, there's the Climate Week in Gabon. And then in Kigali, we also have the Commonwealth, meeting where all of us that belong to the environment sector met. So all these, are built up towards COP27. And it was a consensus building towards specific issues, which aligns with Nigeria's priorities. For instance, the issue of adaptation. the need for us, to have funding to support our adaptation capacity in Nigeria. And then two, of course, the issue of the much debated issue of loss and damage. And then three, as the only country so far in Africa that has developed energy transition plan, we're out there to market our transition plan to get the buy-in of developed partners and other countries, to begin to support the country's initiative towards our net zero commitment. If you recall, in Glasgow last year, Mr. President actually made commitments that Nigeria will transit towards net zero by 2060, giving all the necessary support, both financial, both in terms of capacity development and, in terms of buy-in of our partners. So part of our priorities is to, one, market the ETP, two, participate in the setting up of the what we call African Carbon Market Initiative, and then three, to also ramp up support for adaptation funding and loss and damage. Because we were smarting, from the experience of severe flooding in Nigeria, towards COP. So it's one of the issues that we had, intended to highlight. And of course, we've been able to make effort and ensure liaison with other, what we call AGN, that is the African Group Negotiators, to advance the cause of loss and damage.
So we went up there, and I do recall that the question, the matter of the massive flooding witnessed in Nigeria came up for discussions at that conference. A reference was made to it as one of the clear signs of climate change, where Nigeria suffered perhaps the worst flooding it has seen in recent times.
Absolutely,
and
it appears so.
So what were you able to extract from the international community? And since you also talk about loss and damage here.
Well, it depends on the angle you are looking at it. One, because of the several bilaterals that we're engaged in. For instance, we are engaged in what you call the NZW, the Net Zero World block. It's an alliance of countries that have made commitment to us, net zero by a certain number of years, So there are fundings there to support member states. Now, there is also the UNCCCD event that is focused on the Great Green Wall, which is to support the Sahel countries, build resilient, build trees, and recover wetlands so as to fight encroachment. There are some funds also there. There are issues of adaptation, where the African Development Bank pledged about $25 billion to support adaptation initiatives in Africa. So it depends on which angle you're coming from. There are a number of windows opened that back home, we are going to brief Mr. President that these are the funding lines that we think we can pursue, and then provide next steps. Once he gives approval, we're going to do a follow-up and then begin to see how we can capitalize on those windows.
Now, there's also the matter of cleaner energies, and many countries are committing to achieving cleaner and sustainable energy when it comes to that. But a lot of developing countries have huge challenges in this in transiting to cleaner energies, and some have suggested that developing countries, African nations mostly, are at a huge disadvantage. The other countries are already industrialized, and it is assumed that they are the biggest pollutants.
Absolutely.
And if African nations are expected to take this big leap, then there must be some kind of assistance from the big polluters. Have they seen the need for this?
You see, there has been some kind of pushback in terms of negotiations, from developed countries, because it appears they don't want to admit the fact that they are polluters, because it will lead to some kind of liability, on their part, and they don't want some legally binding commitment. So there has been a pushback from them, but they also accept the fact that because of their activities, towards the race for industrialization, they have impacted on the climate, and it is what we are living with now, that action. So yes, they've agreed in principle. That is why one of the gains of the COP27 is that all parties have agreed to set up a fund to support loss and damage. Now, it is yet unclear how the fund, how they are going to generate money for the fund. Is it going to be from, in quote, polluters? Is it going to be from industries? Is it going to be by public, finance from developed countries? Is something, is work in progress. However, it is generally agreed that it should help support developing countries that are worse affected by either actions of climate change, adverse effect of climate change, or natural disasters. And again, it also leads to the definition of who are worse affected. That is why we try to make a case, even from the president's speech that I read. He made a case for Nigeria in terms of, one, the devastation caused by the floods, the number of people that died, the number of houses, that were washed away, the number of bridges, culverts, roads that were washed away. Trying to build a case, that we also deserve a chunk, of this fund to support our adaptation and mitigation efforts in the country. Having said that, I think that one underlying issue is that developed countries have accepted the fact that they must support developing countries. That is one big, important takeaway. It is now left for member states, to work out the mechanism for access to these funds.
Well, a lot has been said about fossil fuels, decarbonizing the transportation landscape, for instance. Nigeria is a big producer of oil. Absolutely. And it's even going ahead to carry out more exploration. On the other side, countries are beginning to move away from fossil fuels for transportation. Not only is there a transportation deficit in this part of the world, the move to other sources might not be as quickly as we want it to be. What's the way out of this?
Yeah, it may not even be as smooth as we think, in the books. Now, bottom line is, that is why we're marketing the energy transition plan of Nigeria. First, to ensure energy access, particularly by the rural majority. And how do we intend to do that? We want to expand and, also strengthen our hydro electricity capacity generation. We also want to ensure that we deploy as much as we can solar mini grids across rural communities. That will be, supported by communities themselves and the vendor. In other words, a community-driven solar energy grid that they will agree on tariffs, or agree on offtake, etc., etc., etc. Of course, we're also looking at the possibility of, through the coastlines, of wind energy. Now, in liaison with the Ministry of Power, we're also doing a test run of wind energy up in the northern part of the country. We have one in Katsina. We are studying it. We want to see the result and want to see how effective is it. So we're also looking at the options too. Again, we're also looking at hydrogen as an option. However, the transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy in Nigeria will take a long time, because we need a stream of funding to support, a layout of renewable energy infrastructure. That is one. Then two, if you notice at this COP, the Western and developed countries have refused to discuss about fossil fuel.
Right.
Now, it could be bad for the climate, but it's good for Nigeria, because we rely on fossil fuel for most of our, economic and, social needs. in terms of what we do to build roads, to build schools, to manage our infrastructures. So that is one source of revenue for Nigeria. Now, it is not our fault that the Western countries had a pushback over that, but we'll take advantage of that, because initially we had committed to transition to renewables by 2035. That we abandon fossil fuel and probably just even gas itself. So now with this pushback, it gives the country a breather, because the bottom line is that we need funds to support our activities as a government and as a people, to build roads, to build hospitals, to support health facilities, so it's a lot of things that we need to do with our funding and through oil and gas. So as far as we're concerned, we have an ETP. If there's required funding, we are good to go. If there's no funding, we have a backup. We are good to go.
Okay. Well, arising from the decisions taken at COP27,
yes,
which are the ones that we can begin to see an immediate impact on the processes put in place in Nigeria? For instance, when you talk about ensuring that policies and designs of economic goals take into cognizance climate impact on those.
I'm not sure I get your question properly, but I think that you are probably I don't know whether you're talking about priorities or not, but I don't think I got the question properly.
Well, okay. In planning and designing our economic goals,
yes,
one of the issues at COP27 was that you must take into account the impact of climate change on these. Yes, when you're designing it. So, how far with it? How are we incorporating this into our plans, in our development plans here?
Okay. You see, there is what we call inter-ministerial working group, on the energy transition plan. What it does is to ensure that every MDA, begin to factor its own plans, particularly when it comes to budgetary proposals. Now, I'm talking in terms of the public sector now, because in the private sector, there are a number of initiatives that are not within our purview and supervision. But within the context of the government, a lot of MDAs are aligned, to work towards the climate goals of the country. For instance, now, we have the President has established what we call the National Council on Climate Change by virtue of the Climate Change Act. Now, that Climate Change Council is supposed to bring out what we call the National Climate Action Plan. That is a 5-year climate action plan that is aligned to government's priorities and focus, taking into account every subject and sector within the public service. That is one. Two, from our own efforts, both the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Finance and allied ministries, we have developed what we call sovereign green bond. Now, the sovereign green bond, aligns, its implementation to green projects. So every ministry is supposed to identify a particular green project that can be financed by the sovereign green bond. Apart from that, the carbon market initiative that we launched at COP27 is meant to look at our ability as a government to control the carbon market trading space within the country. As we speak now, people are trading on it, privately, but government needs to have control so they can have some level of revenue stream that comes to government. Again, we have also launched what we call the emission trading scheme. These are all aligned towards government's climate priorities to ensure that whatever we do is aligned. Yes, and bottom line is that one of the biggest things we do as a ministry is what we call we call it environmental impact assessment. Whatever project we are going to do in the country, we must assess it, we must analyze it, we must see the impact it has on the climate and the community before we give it the go-ahead. And we're making progress. Mr. President has so far advised that most projects must have an EIA for them to proceed.
Well, Minister, there is a part of all this which to many ordinary folks is confusing. And that is the aspect that deals with agriculture. This is one part of the world where we're striving to increase agricultural production in order to attain food security. But we have also seen in other countries, particularly in South America, where world powers have raised concerns about how agricultural activities can also impact the environment in terms of clearing land for agriculture. How will all of this impact on? Because easily the first thing we think about, agriculture is land, and you have to clear the land
Yes.
to plant.
Now, that is why we are talking about smart agriculture. Now, in smart agriculture, it is envisaged that with a very small space, you can have more yield. That is one. Then two, it is done in such a manner that as you plant or as you clear, you also make provisions for remediation so that it doesn't impact negatively on the land. And then there's something we call also agroforestry. Trying to, as much as we can, rely on products or plants that are not only for protection of the land itself, but providing economic value. For instance, there are plants or trees that you plant them. They not only provide shelter, protect the land, but also provide crops, for sale, for export. So, yes, the land clearance has been over time, depending on how it is done, have impacted really negatively on our afforestation, capacity as a country. Again, what we also did again is to ensure that we have what we call national parks. The national parks, as much as we can, is to ensure that a large chunk of those lands are preserved and are not, affected by human activities. So, as at the last 1-2 years, Mr. President has approved about additional 10 national parks, across the country. And then we also have what we call coastal area protected areas. These are all done to ensure that as much as we can, how you fish, you farm, it does not as much as possible affect our land. We are doing that in such a manner that we balance the scale between having agricultural production, enough to feed the country, and as well as balancing to protect the environment. So it's a delicate balancing act.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Well, there's the other thing which the world has to deal with, and the question of waste. Even at the domestic level, that is proven to be a big challenge.
Absolutely.
Here. And perhaps when the world looks at dealing decisively with the question of waste by 2050, it seems like it's around the corner. And here we are, we still have challenges with even this, disposal of domestic waste. Now, you see, the challenge basically lies in the nature of our structure as a federal government. At best, what we can do as a government in terms of waste management is to provide the enabling policies, which we did. But it depends on the states to ensure enforcement and implementation of those policies, even if they can align it, to their own specific requirements or specific needs or specific priorities. And so it is very difficult, for instance, for us to go to another state, for instance, to enforce waste management policies. We have to get the buy-in of the states. That is why we always have this, what we call the National Environmental Council, every year, where we look at policies, we look at memos and challenges states faced in terms of, circular economy or waste management, plastic pollution, etc., etc., etc. So it is there's an ongoing discussion, ongoing conversation between us and the states to ensure that we manage our waste sustainably in such a manner that we can, embrace circular economy, begin to, see how this product, even though they are waste, they can be recycled, for the purposes and benefits of, the country. But how much of a buy-in would you say Nigerian citizens, now the Nigerian citizen, have in all of this effort? Are people sufficiently aware about the dangers of waste, improper waste disposal? Because you do find that even in urban centers, where you have those who might be termed as enlightened people,
Yeah.
there is still, very low compliance with proper waste disposal. And we see it even Abuja, the federal capital, is an example. Areas where you go to and you begin to wonder if people really care or they really believe that they could be doing huge damage to not just the environment but to themselves. How aware are we?
Yes, what we do essentially is to ensure that we do a lot of sensitization to the people. But I'm quite aware that a large percentage of Nigerians are quite aware of the dangers of, mismanagement of waste. But it's just the typical attitude, mindset of Nigerian, of being indisciplined, and then two, of being careless. And then his attitude to maybe public space, for instance, is that major challenge. But everybody is quite aware that, look, we must manage our waste sustainably, otherwise it affects, our living conditions. And that is why even the United Nations declared that a healthy environment is a fundamental right of the people. Because that underscores how important the need for us to have a healthy environment is. But from our angle at the ministry, we have an organization called Environmental Health Officers Council. What they do is to enforce, environmental health policies, but they can only operate within Abuja, unfortunately, within the FCT, because of the constraints, of constitutional issues.
All right.
Yes. So I believe that Nigerians are sufficiently aware of the impact, negatively or otherwise, of the environment in terms of waste management.
Well, at this point, we'll take a short break. There's more we'll talk about when we return with our guest, the Minister of Environment, who's with us here. Stay with us on One. We'll be back shortly.
Weekend File, your Saturday delight, going to places from the obscure to the hinterland and cities, bringing you development stories and perspectives, connecting the people with government and stakeholders on critical issues of our national life.
We are live in Abuja.
It's 9 p.m. every Saturday on the network service of the NTA. Weekend File, you can't afford to miss it.
Why should we be in a difficult situation financially?
Once upon a time we were rich, but we're not a rich country anymore.
Disaster management is everybody's business.
In all these times, the organization turned to Nigeria.
We would as much want to harness the capacity that is within us so that we see how we can become self-reliant.
1 month ended and you said you are increasing warning strike by 2 months. I mean, you are incubating madness.
Even if these are officials of government who have been told to go and enforce the law and they have gone against the law itself, they must be held accountable.
One, Friday, 10:30 p.m. on NTA Network.
Right, thanks for staying with us. I'm still here with the Minister of Environment, and we're reviewing the outcomes of COP27. Minister, easily one would say, yes, we have been to Sharm el-Sheikh and taken part in this conference, but what are the tangibles that Nigerians can look at and say, yes, this is why we went there, and these are the benefits of being part of this global community at this conference, and this is the next step we're going to take in readiness for future conferences of this nature and setting of targets to achieve the aims and objectives?
Okay, I mentioned earlier that part of our appearance at COP this year is to host bilaterals both within our pavilion and in other pavilions. We've been able to host a number of discussions with a number of groups that have shown very clear indication and commitment to support some activities, either directly with Nigeria Ministry of Environment or with some agencies within the country. For instance, there is an organization called Good Soil VC. It's British based, and they are more focused on renewable energy. And so what I did is to matchmake between Good Soil VC and REA, and they are already talking to begin to see how, because they pledged about 50 million pounds sterling, to support the activities of FREA in terms of, solar grid, deployment across some communities. It's an ongoing discussion. I'm still waiting for their report. I believe that after COP27, they're still discussing, to come to, some tangible conclusions. Then I'm also aware that Nigeria has pitched, to get part of the $25 billion AFD, pledged to support adaptation programs in Africa. Interestingly, I spoke with the chief executive as additional, and he sounded very optimistic and supportive of our cause, and so we're also looking at that. Then we had a bilateral meeting, with some group with the Minister of Cooperation and International Cooperation and Development of Germany, and they've also bought in, to our ETP, and they have advised that we'll continue discussions with, I think GIZ, the German development organization that's here in the country, so we're also going to follow up on that. We have also taken advantage of the funds pledged under what we call One Planet Summit. The One Planet Summit is being championed by President Macron. He and Mr. President of the country and the UNCC, they are jointly pushing, for the Great Green Wall Initiative. Now we've met with the MD, the CEO of what we call Global Mechanisms, Luis Becker, who has been charged to look at every member state and bring out national action plans based on that country's priorities to see how they can draw funds. So it's left for us now to work on the action plans, ensure that they are bankable and acceptable by the partners. But however, I must make it very clear that there are funds that are grants and there are funds that are loans. So we must be able to differentiate between these.
Well, grants and loans. Citizens might be a little bit wary about loans, but grants, okay, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, but usually they give these loans at a concessionary, condition. So, if you take it, and there's a long period of gestation, and what is important is if you can use it effectively, to achieve the result, and objectives you want to achieve. For instance, if it is for land remediation, if you can be able to restore, the rich nature of your land to make it cultivatable, why not? So it's for the benefit of the community to develop their, economic capacity, resilience, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, back home here, Minister, the Ministry of Environment has a lot on its plate now. And coming back from this World Conference, what are the steps that, what are the takeaways that might be applicable in the case of how we deal with certain issues, domestic issues which we face regarding to the environment, pollution, ensuring that we carry on with the processes of greening, which started quite some time ago?
Well, greening is actually everybody's business. If you have a house, you have a garden, you have a school, you have a garden, you have a farmland. So it's everybody's business, whether in the municipal areas or the rural areas. It's important that we green our area, but that comes to the heart of our efforts in terms of what we call biodiversity conservation. Now, cast your mind back to what Yankari used to be in the 70s. Now Yankari is I don't know, it's the image of Yankari now, it's quite distinct from what used to be obtainable in those days. Now, plants are going extinct, animals are going extinct, not only because of, harsh nature, of maybe the effect of desertification, but also the activities of poachers. People, Nigerians, are great hunters, with all due respect. Yes, we like hunting, but it has been taken to a level where our animals are almost gone. That is the dire situation we are in now. So what we did is to develop what we call a policy and strategy to combat wildlife and deforestation. So what we do with that policy is to ensure that we invite all stakeholders, particularly law enforcement agents, the customs, the police, the Navy, the Air Force, Army, everywhere, so that they can begin to, man our border posts, whether at the airport or land borders, to ensure that these animals that have been poached are not sold out arbitrarily, or they are not allowed to go out. Again, we also have, tried to also engage, states to ensure that some biodiversity conservation areas within their states are protected. But unfortunately, with all due respect, I will not mention names, but there are states that where logging are done and executed and perpetrated and supported by governors of those states. So you find that there is an indiscriminate logging of our forests. So the green that you see are gone. That is why sometimes we even have to quarrel with the Federal Ministry of Works when they want approvals, for us to do the EIS, when they want to construct roads. We tell them, yes, it is essential that you construct roads and it benefits the people as well, but it's also important that you provide a plan to reinstate, those trees, your demolition in the process of, constructing roads. So it's always this problem between, those concerns being raised around, road construction and other activities. So we're doing our best to ensure that we go green as much as we can. We've also, now if you look at the African Great Grow Initiative, it's a very ambitious program that intends to make the Sahel belt, that desert belt, to make it green. It's a very ambitious program, but we're on course. We are developing a process where, with the support of what a consultancy firm called, I think Stratus Consult or something. Yes, we are using the GW to plant Joshua tree. One, because it's resilient, but the Joshua tree that we have now that we want to plant is also going to not just be a plant, but it's also going to generate some fruits that will also be suitable for industrial use, for creams, for all sort of things.
Let me bring you to this matter that would seem to be ordinary in the first place, and those are afforestation efforts, where for years and years we carried out campaigns about planting trees. We launched them with much fanfare, but it would seem that beyond all those, we didn't really believe in sustaining that drive. And so if, for instance, we had pursued this with any vigor the last 15, 20 years, then perhaps we would have achieved something tangible. But how far with the question of planting trees? For each one you cut down, you're supposed to replace. Do people still take those seriously? I mean, one might ask.
Yeah, that is why, you see, I am not into this blame game about what someone did or someone did not do. As a government and under my stewardship as the Minister of Environment, we are focused, at the time I took over, on tree planting. Now, what we did as a priority first is to do what we call National Tree Planting Campaign. You know, because in the last 2 years when Mr. President was at ONGA, he did promise that we're going to plant about 25 million trees. So what we did is, when I came, I just focused on that. And Mr. President, in his capacity as the chairman of the Pan-African Green Wall, invited Council of Ministers, you know, of the member states to be in the country about last 2, 3, 4 months or so. And he launched the campaign. That day he was unable to come because he was in, I think in Police College in Kano for their graduation. So the Vice President represented him and did launch that ambitious campaign. As we speak, we're on course. We have provided several seedlings to several states, to several organizations, both private and public. And we receive periodic reports, you know, and the trees we are providing comes with some kind of very minor, simple technology of a pot. Where you plant within the pot. The pot is such that it generates, you know, some moisture to support the tree. So you don't even have to be watering it. The pot is very simple technology, which we are working on. God willing, with all the requisite support from National Assembly, we should be able to deploy as much as we can by next year.
25 million trees.
Yes.
Well,
we have planted more than, I think, so far, close to about 7, 8 million. It's not that it's in one place.
yes, I know that.
Yes, it's in several states. You know, so there are several efforts, both by, you know, individuals, private institutions, and then by state government as well.
In the past, growing up, we used to know what was referred to then as Gandundaj, the forest reserves.
Yes.
But a lot of those have given way to modernization, the building of cities. Now, how, with all the knowledge that we have now about climate change and all of that, and our participation at international conferences such as COP27, how do we now begin to balance the need for development and as protecting the environment as well? This delicate balance that you talked about earlier on, the need to grow, our cities are growing, but then we also need the infrastructure, and we also need the environment to be preserved. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
What are the lessons we have drawn from our past?
I think that what we need to do is to develop what we call smart cities. Let me give you an example of Singapore. In Singapore, for you to fell down a tree, it's a long process. You have to apply to the community, who in turn apply to the municipal government, who in turn apply to the Ministry of Afforestation, who in turn sent to the Prime Minister to fell just one tree in Singapore is a tough call. So unless we're able to, that is one, if we're able to develop that kind of culture, you know, this indiscriminate felling of trees in Abuja, once because you have a plot, you want to build a house, you just fell a tree, you don't care. So this must be stopped. Then we must have, again, Singapore is one of the best, what they call the most livable city. The most livable city because of its green identity. Whether you are building how many story building, you must state the number of trees you are planting in those floors. Every floor must have trees. Every floor must have flowers. So it's a smart city. Everywhere you go is green. Whether you are in the train, whether you are in tram, whether you are everywhere, whether you're on the street, it's about green. So we must be able to develop this culture of a smart city that is green friendly. That is one. And then two, like I told you, Mr. President approved additional 10 national parks. That is a major victory for us. Yes, we have issues to do with banditry and challenge of security in trying to man and police, these national parks. But is an effort that we are going to sustain it, to ensure that our biodiversity conservation are preserved. Despite the fact that, yes, to a large extent, Abuja is a bit green friendly, and if we could sustain it, we could be more than that, but we can do more.
Well, as we look into the future, going from what has happened so far, what are the prospects of Nigeria attaining the goals that it set for itself? What are the prospects, especially against the backdrop of funding, which you had alluded to, and with so many competing needs in the country?
Absolutely.
What future?
Well, I think that, like Mr. President also mentioned in his address at COP27, countries must look inwards. That is why it is novel, the issue of this sovereign green bond. We have issued the first and second tranche. We are now preparing for the third tranche, to support our green initiatives, as a government. So that is one, approach to it. Then we are partnering with a number of private sector, partners, and they've shown tremendous support, towards supporting government, climate ambitions. For instance, the UNDP has been a very worthy partner, of the Nigerian government, in terms of our climate ambitions, and of course the World Bank. The World Bank recently gave us about $700 million, to support, what we call development of, wetlands recovery program, okay. And then, also land remediation, etc., across 19 other states of the country. And then, of course, we are partnering also with a lot of partners like AFD, the French Development Agency, and the GIZ. A number of them are supporting our cause. So the way forward, I think, is to continue to ramp up this partnership, to support government's initiative, and then also develop our homegrown, initiatives to support our projects that leads towards green.
On the whole, would you say this was a successful experience for this country, and that, yes, going forward, participating in meetings such as these would be beneficial as we look forward to perhaps next COP?
Okay, you see, there are a number of COPs. It's just that COP27 appears because of the political undertones. It's so pronounced. But as we speak, we are going to attend what we call the CBD conference, which is COP15, right? COP15. And it focuses basically on biodiversity. So that is where you go and see all the international and global players in conservation activities, wildlife protection, and for us as a country, we intend to be there, to join the conversation, to ensure that we also have a respectable, presence in terms of whatever comes out of it in terms of funding, So generally, I think COPs could be described as talk shows, but they enable conversations to flow. Now, without that conversation, we would not have gotten the developed countries to commit to funding loss and damage. So I think it's a conversation that, for all it takes, we need to be patient, to be in it and ensure that whatever it is for the country, we get it for the country.
Oh, well, on that very optimistic note, we would like to thank you for availing us of the outcomes of COP27.
Thank you very much.
And look forward to asking you to come again so we can talk about many other matters regarding the environment.
Thank you.
And see which other targets we have set ourselves. So, well, as you do know, some countries have set certain targets in terms of dealing with nylons, polythene bags and things like that. Recycling, for instance, that we're still working on. I think that from what we know so far, there aren't as many as we would desire recycling efforts going on within the country, and again the huge challenge of waste disposal is still there, but we will talk about this on some other
Absolutely.
platform.
It will be a pleasure to be here again.
All right, but for now I would like to thank you for coming on. Honorable Minister of Environment Mohammed Hassan Abdullahi, it's been nice talking to you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's quite a pleasure talking to you again.
Right.
Yes,
okay.
Sir. Thank you.
And this is where we end this edition of the program. We'll be back next week with One on One. I am Cyril Stover. Continue to stay safe.